Imagine you wake up in the middle of the night with a crushing pain in your chest. You cannot breathe. Your vision is blurring, and a cold sweat breaks out across your forehead. Your spouse panics, grabs the phone, and dials for an ambulance. In this exact moment, you're experiencing the most terrifying vulnerability of the human condition. You are not thinking about the cost of gasoline, the stock market, or your retirement portfolio. You are only thinking about survival. When the paramedics rush you through the automatic sliding doors of the local emergency room, you believe you are entering a sanctuary of healing. You assume the doctors and nurses rushing to your bedside are dedicated to one single objective: saving your life. But you are wrong. In the eyes of Wall Street, you are not a patient in distress. You are a captive consumer with absolutely zero negotiating power. You are the ultimate distressed asset. Welcome to the darkest frontier of modern finance, where the Hippocratic Oath has been quietly replaced by a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder returns, where private equity billionaires have realized that the business of dying is the most profitable industry on earth. Today, we are looking past the white coats and the sterile hospital corridors. We will show you how ruthless financial engineering has taken control of your local emergency room, not to improve your health and not to cure your disease, but to extract every last dollar of your life savings right when you are too weak to fight back. This is the story of how Wall Street bought your life. To understand how you are being financially slaughtered in the emergency room, you must first understand the predators. We are talking about private equity, or PE. These are massive, secretive investment firms that manage billions of dollars for wealthy elites and institutional funds. Their entire business model is based on a strategy called the leveraged buyout. They borrow massive amounts of money, buy a target company, aggressively cut costs to boost short-term profits, and then sell the hollowed-out shell a few years later. For decades, they did this to retail chains, toy stores, and local newspapers. But eventually, Wall Street realized that retail is unpredictable. Consumers can simply choose not to buy a toy or a newspaper. But healthcare? Healthcare is a completely inelastic market. When you are bleeding out from a car crash, you do not pull out your smartphone to compare hospital prices. You are a hostage to geography and biology. And to a private equity firm, a hostage is the perfect customer. So they started buying up the medical infrastructure of the United States. They did not put their corporate logos on the hospital buildings. Instead, they executed a stealth takeover of the personnel. By recent estimates, private equity firms now control the staffing of nearly 30% of all emergency rooms in America. When you look at the doctor treating you, they are wearing a badge with the hospital's name on it. But behind the scenes, that doctor no longer works for the hospital. They work for a massive staffing agency owned by a Wall Street megafund. Firms like Blackstone and KKR began quietly rolling up emergency room staffing groups, anesthesiologists, and even ambulance fleets. You think you are being treated by your trusted community hospital. But in reality, you are being serviced by a subsidiary of a Manhattan hedge fund. Once Wall Street took control of the doctors, they activated one of the most devastating financial weapons ever created. It is called surprise billing. Let us say you are incredibly responsible. You pay thousands of dollars a year for premium health insurance. You have a medical emergency, and you make sure the ambulance takes you to a hospital that is strictly in-network. You assume you are financially protected. But weeks after you recover, you open your mailbox and find a medical bill for $20,000. You call your insurance company in a panic, and they deliver the brutal truth. Yes, the hospital building was in-network, but the specific emergency room doctor who spent 10 minutes looking at your chart, he works for a private equity staffing firm like Envision Healthcare, and that firm deliberately refused to sign a contract with your insurance company. Imagine walking into a restaurant that advertises $10 steaks. You eat the steak, you pay the $10, and you walk out. But a week later, you get a bill from the chef for $5,000 because the chef secretly works for a different company and decides his salt is extremely expensive. In any other industry, this would be prosecuted as extortion. In the American healthcare system, it was a finely tuned corporate strategy. By intentionally remaining out of network, these Wall Street-owned medical groups bypassed the negotiated insurance prices and sent the astronomical bills directly to you. If you could not pay, they hounded you with collection agencies and destroyed your credit score. The extortion became so systemic and so severe that the federal government was forced to pass the No Surprises Act in 2022 to stop it. But Wall Street does not surrender. They simply pivoted their models to exploit new loopholes, squeezing insurance providers and driving up premiums for everyone. While everyday citizens were losing their homes to pay for unexpected medical care, private equity executives were buying super yachts with the profits. Price gouging patients was only the first half of the Wall Street playbook. The second half was a ruthless campaign of cost-cutting, known in the financial world as strip mining. When a private equity firm buys a medical practice, they operate on a strict 3 to 5 year timeline. To boost those quarterly profit margins, the Excel spreadsheets dictate that the most expensive items must be eliminated. And in a hospital, the most expensive items are the most experienced, board-certified doctors. So, the Wall Street managers begin firing veteran emergency room physicians. They replace them with cheaper, less experienced medical professionals. These professionals are incredibly hard-working, but they simply do not have the decade of intensive medical school and residency training that a veteran doctor has. A cheaper salary means a higher dividend. The emergency room is no longer a triage center for the sick and dying. It is a high-speed revenue funnel, optimized by data scientists who have never held a scalpel in their lives. When medical decisions are made to hit corporate profit targets, quality of care inevitably collapses. A recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that when private equity takes over a hospital, hospital-acquired adverse events actually increase by 25%. Patients suffer more falls, more central line infections, and more surgical complications. The invisible death toll begins to quietly rise. If you think firing doctors is terrifying, you have not seen their ultimate financial magic trick. It is called the Sale-Leaseback. And it is the exact mechanism that Wall Street used to physically dismantle the American hospital system. When a private equity firm buys a hospital, they are not just buying the medical business. They are buying the extremely valuable real estate that the hospital sits on. To instantly extract cash, the private equity firm will take the hospital's physical land and buildings and sell them to a corporate landlord. They pocket hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and immediately pay it out to their own investors. But the hospital still needs a building to operate in. So the new real estate owner forces the hospital to rent back its own building at sky-high lease rates. Imagine someone buys your house, sells it to a bank, keeps all the cash for themselves, and then forces you to pay double the rent to keep living in your own bedroom. This is exactly what happened to Steward Healthcare. A private equity giant named Cerberus Capital Management bought the hospital system. They sold off the hospital real estate to a corporate landlord for $1.2 billion. Cerberus executives walked away with a reported $800 million in profit. But the local hospitals were left completely crippled, suffocating under the weight of massive new rent payments. Because all the hospital's revenue was now being drained to pay the corporate landlord, there was no money left for actual medicine. Surgical tools were not sterilized because the hospital could not pay the vendor bills. Vital medical equipment was repossessed by debt collectors. In some facilities, the infrastructure decayed so badly that bats were literally flying around the intensive care units. The doctors and nurses begged for basic supplies to save lives, while the financial architects of the disaster counted their guaranteed profits. When a hospital is bled dry by massive rent payments and stripped of its best doctors, it goes bankrupt. In 2019, a private equity firm bought Hahnemann University Hospital in Philadelphia, a safety net hospital that had served the city for over 170 years. Within months, they drove it into bankruptcy, closed its doors, and tried to sell the medical resident training slot cash. But the private equity firms do not lose a single penny. Because of the way corporate liability works, the Wall Street firm is legally shielded from the bankruptcy of the hospital. They had already extracted their billions in dividends years ago. They simply pack up their briefcases and walk away from the burning wreckage. But who is left to suffer the consequences? The everyday people. The hospital doors are padlocked. The emergency room lights are turned off permanently. If someone suffers a severe heart attack, the ambulance can no longer drive 5 minutes down the road. They have to drive 50 miles to the next county. And in a medical emergency, 50 miles is a death sentence. Pregnant women go into labor with nowhere to safely deliver their children. This is not a bug in the system. It is the perfect, intended execution of it. It extracted maximum capital from a vulnerable population and transferred it to the elite, leaving the public to absorb all the suffering. So, the next time you hear politicians arguing about healthcare reform, do not be distracted by the endless debates over insurance premiums or government regulations. Look deeper into the shadows of the operating room. The most dangerous parasite in the healthcare system is not a virus, and it is not a disease. It is a financial model. A model that views a sick human being not as a life to be saved, but as a profit margin to be ruthlessly exploited. In an economy where billionaires can legally dismantle your local emergency room, health is no longer a human right. It is a luxury asset. This is money noir. We do not worship the white coats. We do not trust the illusion of care. We only track the capital. Subscribe to the channel, because the most ruthless trick the devil ever played was not stealing your wealth on the trading floor. It was hiding his cash register inside a sanctuary of healing.